I think that's been a lesson for me, is that there have been various kind of underlying assumptions. Once we get gay marriage, it's over, right? Once we get XYZ, it's over. And it's never that simple. You kind of have to be vigilant and keep your foot on the gas towards justice. There's a constant underlying pushback. And so I think we just have to remain insistent on the dignity and the validity of our lives, whatever gender, however we chose to live them.
Hello and welcome to Power Beyond Pride, a weekly queer change-making podcast bringing you voices and ideas from across our fierce and fabulous spectrum to transform our world. I am Mattie Bynum, the loudest host in the building. I'm always going to be heard over everybody, whether it's my outfit making statements or just my presence alone letting you know I'm in the building. I am joined today by four of my favorite co-hosts. We are sitting here on our Reply All episode, and we're going to discuss some hot topics. So I'm going to go ahead and let my other co-hosts introduce themselves.
Hey, everybody, I'm Kenyon Farrow, he, him pronouns. I'm a writer, activist, media strategist, and sometimes a kind of Olivia Pope for social justice. I'm very glad to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Melodie KG. I use she or they pronouns. I'm an artivist, provocateur, writer, consultant, nonprofit leader, Jill of all trades, based in Minneapolis, and here to set the world on fire.
I love it. I'm here. I'm Shane Lukas, he, him, his, a lifelong activist, harm reductionist, owner of a great idea. And I feel like a pope in my own way, in that I'm definitely very gay. I definitely like to wear big robes and knee pads. So once a month here at Power Beyond Pride, we gather together in what we call Reply All, where we focus on issues or questions impacting activists, share insights from our own work across communities, and take questions from the Power Beyond Pride mailbox or mail slot. It depends on which of your hosts you're talking to. We call it both now.
So first on our docket, really tragic news, but needs to be talked about. Our community lost an incredible leader, icon, trans and sex worker activist, Miss Major. Rest in power, Miss Major. She was a touchstone in the movement. And to commemorate her passing, community members gathered in New York City this past week at Riverside to honor her work, to grieve, to do some community building in the face of ongoing transphobia across the country. Activists attending the event reported a variety of suspect things coming from the institution hosting the memorial, from limitations on the language used to reduce social media, access to restrooms, and all kinds of censorship, fuckery, very reminiscent of what we saw last year with the passing of Cecilia Gentili and her memorial. So just want to say thank you so much to Miss Major and to all of the folks in her immediate family of activists and community who supported her through her transition on. We will miss you so much.
Rest in power indeed. Rest in power indeed. It's interesting. Reports are just coming out early, just from social media, a lot of informal attendees, activists who've attended the event, really speaking up a little bit about some of the controls at the ceremony, which is reminiscent, or at least the cause of it is being cited as coming as a result of what happened in 2024 with Cecilia Gentili's memorial. There were concerns. It was at that time held at St. Patrick's Cathedral. As a former or current, I can't speak, I don't know if either of you knew, Cecilia Gentili had certainly a history in Catholicism, and certainly it felt like honoring her memory, that was an appropriate venue. The venue itself had enormous outcry after the fact. There were a lot of people who did not attend the event, but simply are parishioners at the church who spoke out about it in very transphobic language, were concerned, raised issues around the dress, the language, all of it. Really, in many ways, I think taking away from a variety of really larger issues around, obviously, the loss of the trans leaders. When we talk about the number of trans leaders we have lost at a younger age. And Cecilia was an unexpected passing. Miss Major was fighting cancer for a very long time. And certainly we feel her loss a lot in this current moment, as it's very recent. But it was really reminiscent of a lot of transphobic language that the institutions raised. So how can faith communities that say they stand for love, especially ones that are coming from more progressive spaces, how can they show up for queer community members, both in life and death?
Just shut up and get out of the way. Let our people pass with dignity, for fuck's sake.
I get you, Melody. I definitely do. I think when it comes to this topic, I think there are definitely two sides to the conversation. But the overall for me, I would think is let a person be honored. Like it's not about like when I was thinking about the Cecilia service, my only issue that I think I had raised a concern about was not who she was or how she identified. It was if a person identifies as atheist, why have it in a religious build? You know what I'm saying? So when it comes to that perspective, I don't think that was a smart move in a sense. However, how people have an issue with why would you have it here? If they believe in spirituality, that's not my place to tell them they can't be here. They can't have it here. So I agree with Melody. Move out the way. Let it be done if that's what they believe. That's who they were. If they were a spiritual or that believed in some type of, leave it alone.
Yeah, I think part of the outrage about this specific is because it's Riverside Church, right? Which just has a long history as a very progressive church. I actually organized a faith-based event early in my kind of organizing work in 2005 that was specifically about challenging homophobia and transphobia through a kind of a faith lens. It was called the Revival Initiative. And to see this specific institution respond this way, I think is part of what people were particularly incensed about. I mean, Cecilia, and I also say too, to be transparent, like Miss Major was a friend and kind of mentor of mine. And I also knew Cecilia pretty well through doing work in New York for a long period of time. So just the loss of these two women in particular in the last year and a half has been a lot on top of a lot of loss for me personally. So there's that. But I think different from say like the St. Patrick's Cathedral with Cecilia, that particular church has a history of just homophobia and transphobia. If we think about the ACT UP action that happened at St. Patrick's Cathedral, the same church in 1989, and 35 years later, see basically nothing has changed in the way Cecilia's memorial was held there, I think says a lot about how far we have to go. And I think the other thing, I kind of thought of two other things in relationship to this situation. One is not so much about church specifically, but about the way family or institutions shape or kind of try to detrans people even in death. Is the case of Girl Lala, who was a Black trans woman who died recently. Family decided to have her funeral with her dead name buried in male clothes and a suit and whatnot, and seeing people respond to that and respond to, recently I saw Aaron Lang, who's a Black trans activist, respond to the father of this person who was out defending their family decision to bury them in quote unquote male clothes. And it is, to me, is so sad that like even in this day and age, whether we're talking about even supposedly progressive faith institutions down to kind of how family members even now think about death and how to memorialize trans folks is just sad. And it reminds me of what Barbara Smith wrote about going to James Baldwin's funeral at St. John the Divine in New York in the 1980s. And she wrote an essay called "We Must Always Bury Our Dead Twice," speaking to the erasure of queer people in funerals and the way that those of us who knew them have to go in those spaces and show up and sometimes be met with lies and versions of people that didn't exist or only kind of half truths about their lives in order to placate some of the living is still where we are, unfortunately.
That's
Well,
really
I'm gonna say it
powerful.
like this. Hold on, real quick. When I die, this is going on record because we're recording. If anybody put me in a suit, and if y'all four come to my casket and I ain't got my wig on, I give all permission to haunt whoever was in charge over my memorial service. Okay. If you see Matthew written up there on the bulletin, even though I love my name, and if it ain't Mattie, you have all permission to cut a fool in the church house, please. Because I will come back and do it myself. I may knock the cross off the wall just to prove a point. I'm just saying, because I agree with you, King. That's not cool. And I take it even further than just honoring who we are as people, but just in general, honor people's wishes. Don't do that. I hate when people try to rewrite a person's life after they die to fit their narrative. Like we shouldn't do that.
And I think that, first of all, absolutely. And we know this is far in the future, but yes, may we all haunt that space, because honoring people where they are is important. But that brings up, Kenyon, your point around the feeling of burying people twice. It's also a case where we are practicing a different type of memorialization as a community. Like, in some ways, we've not been able to get access or elevate many of our icons and people who have been leaders in the community. Many of them lost either during the early days of the epidemic. But, in those times after, we haven't spent a lot of time practicing what it means to elevate queer people at that national level in these conversations. So I appreciated, ahead of Miss Major's ceremony, there were a number of things out there informing participants about the event, informing participants about how it's going to happen, the ways to engage. I think, again, perhaps learning from St. Patrick's. And I say learning from St. Patrick's in the sense that the community wanted to have the space there. I think that the conflict came from, my understanding is, uncertainty about what the language was, although we can get into a separate conversation about a church that is afraid of the word whore or prostitution and yet talks about Mary and varying parts of Christian faith narrative, and yet is afraid of similar language when trying to elevate someone who is advocating for rights and dignity for individuals who embody that part of that narrative. That, I think, should be held to account, for sure, right? That's part of it, is that this is the language was one of the things that was held to account in St. Patrick's. But I think my understanding is there was a lot done to make sure that there was lessons learned, that it was a safe space, that it was encouraged to be a safe space. So I guess, how much of it do we think is the current climate, that no matter what we do, it's going to be a case of trying to respond to institutions that historically may have been supportive or are supportive? And how do we reinforce that support before we find ourselves in these spaces where we end up back at conflict with allies? Question mark?
That's a deep question.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's never, unfortunately, it's never over in a way. I think that's been a lesson for me, especially where queer politics and activism is concerned in the last 20 years, is that there have been various kind of underlying assumptions about different. So one was kind of like an assumption, oh, once we get gay marriage, it's over, right? Once we get XYZ, it's over. And it's never that simple. In a way, you kind of have to be vigilant and keep your foot on the gas towards justice. There is no kind of nirvana to arrive to in this sense, right? It's a constant struggle. And there are times where things are more kind of open, progressive, accepting, liberatory, et cetera. And then there's a constant underlying pushback. And if you allow that sort of pushback to gain traction and to gain power to then leverage over people's lives, you end up back at square one. And so I think we just have to remain insistent on the dignity and validity of our lives, whatever gender, however we chose to live them.
Do we try to make an institution's life's hell? If you pardon my use of heaven and hell, but is our job then, as activists, as community members, then to lay that accountability out at the feet of the conversation aggressively?
I think yes and no. I think also too, it depends on the fight that you're fighting. Because I agree with what Kenyon said, but I look at it from the whole church and the state separation. Because when it comes to political things, there's going to be a give and take. There's going to be a push and pull, because policy is always changing. Policy is always turning. People are progressing. Parties are changing. But when it comes to the church, in over 800 years has not changed. They're not trying to change their position. So no matter how much accountability we put at their feet, I feel like sometimes, and this is my personal opinion, we can't keep setting ourselves up for a failure, because how do you have a conversation or a discussion or argument with someone who doesn't even want to hear reason or see reason? The church only sees its perspective. And I'm saying the church as a whole. I'm not saying individuals, but I'm just saying churches as a whole, as an institution, only wants to look at what they believe. They never want to open their mind enough to hear anybody else's opinion. So yeah, we can keep fighting, but when do we understand that some fights are going to always just be a fight? There is never going to be a winning. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And honestly, that's how I feel about the federal government quite often. It's this institution, honey, she don't want to change. Honey, she's not going to change. And like, we can vote and we can advocate and make these little like temporary wins happen. And they still are going to fuck with us because they can, because they want to, because they're trying to maintain a certain order, maintain a certain paradigm. And no matter how much progress there's made at different levels or with different individuals, as an institution, it does not want to change. It point blank period.
Yeah, it's often a struggle, I think, because it's like the argument, do we continue to fight these institutions or do we build our own? And I personally think you have to do both, because
Yeah.
you have to actually build, because the building actually helps create something new and actually can scale to lean into transformative change. But then also, if you kind of leave the institutions that have, whether it's political power as the federal government, or whether it's sort of cultural and kind of social power as, say, the Catholic Church or the media or those kinds of institutions, if you concede the space to them where they already have such great power, you allow them to run with it, right? And so I think you have to I think we have to sort of do both. But I think I'm going to transition us. I think this is a good pivot to the next question. And it's an interesting kind of conversation, having two North Carolinians here in the conversation to talk about. So we're talking about the ICE raids that are currently happening in the state of North Carolina, which follow those across the country and is now threatening communities in New Orleans in particular. These ICE raids have been escalating again, and entire communities are living in fear. Throughout the past week, people in cities like Charlotte, and I saw some video, I think, from Durham last night, are scared to send their kids to school. Major cities are being hit with these raids. So I guess let's start the conversation with these sort of questions. So what are practical ways the LGBTQ plus community can show up for undocumented neighbors right now? How do we respond to these attacks, knowing that we're going into the holiday season? And this is the time when people start to get together, right? And as we're seeing with a lot of these raids, like, they're particularly targeting places where people get together. They're targeting schools, they're targeting churches, they're targeting places where groups outside of Home Depot and these sort of places where they are known that they're going to be, particularly Latinx folks, but certainly immigrants are going to be. So we'll start there and we'll open it up.
I would say this though, real quick, Kenyon. We do need to go to break real quick. So when we come back, can we start with this topic? Because it is a really good topic that we need to discuss and go into. So as you are listening to Power Beyond Pride, do not turn that station, or do not, well, I mean, I guess it is a podcast. I'm such a radio head. But don't go nowhere. Just stay right here, because this is a topic that is worth waiting for. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. This is Power Beyond Pride, a queer change-making podcast, and I'm Shane Lukas, here with my phenomenal co-hosts, Kenyon, Melodie, and Mattie. And we are having an incredible conversation about an intense topic of the last week. ICE raids, as Kenyon mentioned, have been happening across the country now for months, right? Whether it's LA, whether it's Chicago. And this past week, it's hit those of us in North Carolina. So I'm here in North Carolina. Mattie and I are both here in North Carolina. And it's going on its way down to New Orleans, where one of our co-hosts, Daniel, is based. And so we are seeing this stuff firsthand, as many across the country are seeing it. We're seeing families stay home. We're seeing fear in the conversations. I'm getting notifications from a variety of people. And the question Kenyon asked right before we went to break was, what can queer community members do in this current moment? How can we respond? And the number one thing is to look at what kind of resources you have available to support those families to maintain their safety and to ensure they have safety. So if you've got a car, it is using that car to drive groceries and materials to somebody's home and to connect with local organizations that help you coordinate that food and those resources. If there are other resources that you have available, whether that is you want to donate, certainly things like feminine hygiene products, diapers, other things. There's a lot of food banks and a lot of other organizations doing some incredible work getting food to these families. But things like that are harder to come by. And those individuals, many of those individuals in those families can't go out to the store when raids are currently active. So there's a number of ways the queer community members can reach out and connect in that way. Another way is just to reach out to your community members. That doesn't just include individuals who may not have documentation, but your neighbors, I would say, of any Latina descent, because many of them are facing hostility in varying ways, in indirect ways and direct ways. And it is, for many of my friends that I've spoken to and other activists, they are seeing it in a variety of parts of their life that they had not experienced prior. And I think it's important to check in on folks in this current moment. So I would add that into the mix as well. I'd love to hear what the rest of our hosts think.
I would definitely say in this moment, there are multiple ways you can reach out and help. Number one, I do caution. And listen, when I say it, I need people to hear every word I'm saying. I'm not telling you not to help and not to be vigilant, but if you see something happening, try not to escalate it and make it worse than what it is. Yes, step in and help. Yes, if you can be of assistance. I saw a video this weekend actually, of an ice raid going on that had happened in Charlotte. And there was a lot of people who were simply just trying to help, but it made the agents angrier. So they got aggressive and got worse. And it made it worse for the man they were trying to take. And I'm just like, at some point, we have to also be mindful there are children watching this happen. So while you're trying to stop the cop and the cop is forcefully ripping people, like, we have to be careful of towing that line of help, but not escalate. And also, on that same note, keep your head on a swivel, because a lot of times we have to pay attention. This is how I think community watch really is important, that we have to watch out for each other. If you see it coming, let somebody else know, because what we have noticed is they're not asking you your nationality. They're just picking people up at this point. And then they're disguising it by saying different things. But we all need to be careful in this season.
And I know that ICE has been using a variety of really nasty tactics to kind of get whatever their directive accomplished is. So for folks who maybe don't know what they're looking for, what do we actually know about what ICE is doing and how they're operating? Because sometimes we're noticing people see stuff and not really know what's happening. So I'm wondering, for folks in the room, what do you all know? What have you all observed about how these folks are operating in this time?
Yeah, in terms of the way they're operating, again, it is diabolical in many cases. It is waiting at elementary school pickup lines for young people who are waiting for their parents and then going to access those parents. There was a senior woman who was assaulted, and again, I should know, did have her citizenship, who was assaulted this week in Raleigh at a supermarket. It is going to the places and the venues that individuals who have lives engage in, right? And it is going to these places. These are not criminals. These are not people engaging in criminal activity. They are people engaging in their day-to-day lives. And so all of those avenues none of them have been off limits. So the original conversation was, of course, going after criminals, going after people with records. These are not those individuals. They need to make a number they promised. And that number is irrelevant of the humanity that they destroy in the process. And so in order to make that number, which is an astronomical number, and even with the number that they have cruelly and often incorrectly arrested since the beginning, they aren't even close. So they continue to be more aggressive in those strategies. So they are doing highway road stops and other places. What I really, and I know, Mattie, you got something to share in a second. What I'm really impressed by and what I really encourage queer people to do is to be in community with their neighbors. And in that, engaging in these conversations and communications so that people are aware when there are things happening, when there are ICE sightings. There's a separate conversation to have about criminals and other people who are masquerading as ICE and also causing their own havoc in their own regard, again, taking advantage of that level of cruelty. But there are a lot of communities that have safe and secure lines for communications that they are engaging and notifying other individuals about the presence and making sure that families that themselves may, for example, have documentation. But even then, again, it's incredibly traumatizing to get stopped, but may have undocumented family members, may have undocumented people in community, whatever the case is. 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon. I would say in America, with a number of individuals who are our neighbors and are amazing neighbors, we probably all have far less than 6 degrees of separation from individuals who have mixed documentation status or various documentation statuses. And so I think being in community with your neighbors and with the shared value of protecting and securing that individuals who by no means deserve this level of dehumanization, no one does, certainly that you are there being in that active protection. So they're just going after any place that feels vulnerable, that people have no choice but to be at, hospital, healthcare systems. For one of our partners who works specifically in HIV prevention, we are nervous because these are community members, even again, those with documentation status, those who still will not go to their appointments if they are people living with HIV who need to seek treatment or prevention strategies to ensure that we are reducing. But HIV is just one example of people in challenges with cancer diagnosis. People are challenged with other illnesses or other conditions that they need support for and are not getting it. And it's just diabolical.
And I was going to say real quick, Melody, to answer your question, 2 things I do know for sure is I know in Charlotte and in North Carolina, this is something I've been talking to some of my family and friends in Charlotte. Pay attention to your community, because what ICE is doing is coming 2 or 3 days ahead. So if you see cars that look suspicious, like Dodge Caravans is what they're driving, Suburbans, Expeditions. So if you see cars that don't make sense and you know that you have population in your community, start letting people know, hey, be mindful. This car's been sitting here for 2 or 3 days. I don't know who that is. It don't belong to anybody on this block. And then also, too, a good one I heard from the news was in Charlotte, especially in Charlotte, they were telling people if you have court cases that are scheduled within this month or next month for your status, unless your lawyer calls you first, do not come to the courthouse. That your lawyer should contact you and escort you to court, but don't just show up at the courthouse. So those are 2 things I do know that we can do, is keep vigilant. And also, if you know someone that's going for a court hearing, even if you're not, go with them, because the bigger the group, the more people, it can help you out as well.
I'm glad you raised that, because that's one of the horrifying places is that there are individuals who are trying to abide by the policies and practices of immigration policy, right? Immigration process. And they are getting punished in this process simply by trying to follow the rules, by trying to follow procedures that they didn't invent, that we gave to them, that we dragged out their court systems, that they're trying to abide by it. And now they're being punished for it. And again, so thank you, Mattie. I appreciate you mentioning the courts, because that's also intense.
Yeah. I was going to say too that, so a couple of things. I think one, some of the tactics, while it is kind of raised at a scale and now involving kind of actual military, but if you've lived in a Black community, I'm 51 years old, and at the time in the 80s and 90s when there was a massive kind of funding and expansion of police and the expansion of the U.S. prison system under the guise of war on drugs, we saw very similar things, except it just went through police departments. So they basically gave money to police departments to buy militarized weaponry, surveillance systems, tanks, and helicopters, things of this nature. So Black folks, you probably have seen this if you lived in a major city and was of some level of consciousness from the 1980s onward, right? So some of this is that, but kind of actually just using the actual military and Coast Guard to sort of operationalize. I'm not saying that it's not particularly violent or vile, but they've built this system over a long period of time. Second thing I just want to say as it pertains particularly to what to do. So one is, there are a lot of organizations that are offering kind of trainings right now in cities with folks about what to do around the ICE raids or other issues of complying with various kinds of Trump orders. I know unions like SEIU, I attended a non-compliance training with SEIU back over the summer, and they're doing those all over the country where they have members. There are other organizations that are doing those trainings in cities specifically around the ICE raids. And also now you can go online and look at what they did in Chicago, right? And what communities organized, which in some ways people will write about what happened in Chicago, just the history because of how, frankly, ingenious a lot of the kind of organizing was to protect people, to record officers, to unmask them essentially. And also just even seeing queer people in places like responsible, seeing gay men like kind of go up and kind of flirt and kind of make the ICE agents uncomfortable, right? Like in way, like actually using your queerness to get in the way, right? And to make them leave because they're uncomfortable, right? Being around gay men, right? Or whatever, right? So I think there are a lot of different tactics that people are using. But I would encourage people, like there are places people are really offering these kind of trainings both online and in person right now if you just want to learn about kind of what makes sense to do based on where you are.
That's brilliant. Thank you for sharing that, Kenyon. I love that.
Can I say one more thing before we move off of this topic?
Absolutely.
It's out there, this is a thing I want to pose to cities and states. Can we not be like other states and wait till after stuff happens? Like, we need to follow suit with Chicago. Y'all notice how after the ICE raid, Chicago did a mandate to where churches, schools, and hospitals were considered to be safe zones. I don't understand why other states haven't followed suit. Like, why are we waiting until ICE gets here and then all of a sudden we're just having this discussion of what, you know what I'm saying? Instead of waiting for it to happen and then declaring this is a safe zone and you can't come here. Let's go ahead and set this up now because they're coming to every state.
Well,
Like,
to that
this
note,
is-
I'd like to add one thing to that, which is to say that the federal government has challenged the sanctuary city, which some of those sanctuary cities are those that have passed similar processes, and they've said that they would ignore them, right? Schools were also included in that list. Now, again, that hasn't, I don't think that has been aggressively tested because when this happened last time, when we went through this during the first Trump administration, there were churches that did protect and hold, in fact, up to months and I think years at a time, a few individuals who sought protection within the confines of the church. So there is while cities should do that, it certainly suggests, again, their commitment to their neighbors. Because this is federal, to Kenyon's point, because this is federal versus local jurisdiction, it does hold it some different parameters, I believe. Okay. But I do want to, before we go to break, I'd love to get quick thoughts real quick on this, because I think from what I've heard you say, Kenyon and Mattie, just something hints around something that I just want to mention around queer people. Like, I think that there are some ulterior motives to this that go beyond immigration. And I would love to get your thoughts on whether or not you think I'm off the wall here or not. No. But I think it's practice. I think, again, we've seen this before, as Kenyon mentioned, when we saw the criminalization of particularly Black men in urban environments in the 1980s and 90s. I worry that queer people, that there may be, and again, an escalation around anti-trans initiatives, that there are reasons to look at also a legitimization of police forces around voting times to intimidate just around poll access and all that during the election. So those two things feel like to me in the wings, as if this is also a practice of what exercising federal enforcement in this way could lead to. And I'd love to see if y'all think I'm bonkers or whether or not there's some real reasons our queer community should be having this conversation too.
Well, Kenyon, since you just had your birthday, would you like to take the first? Yeah, pay homage to the Scorpio in the building. I will allow you to
just passing that 51 years, by the way. There we go. Happy birthday.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll think first. No, I do think it is actually, I won't say practice because it's actually happening in actual real time. But I'll say it this way, that I think that this is one step in a larger strategy, right? Which is ultimately to militarize the country, particularly the cities, in order to squelch dissent around a whole range of things that this administration is planning. And frankly, I'll just say the right has been planning actually for years. If you look at really since, like, kind of, I would take it back to, there was a march in the late 90s called the Million Youth Movement March in Harlem, where Giuliani really tested out a lot of things that we later saw at Prides in New York, right? So, but prior to that, you could kind of have a march or a rally in New York and not be barricaded in those like big metal gates that they force everybody into along the sides or whatever. And they use that march actually to test a lot of things that then once 9/11 happened, they just instituted writ large in New York, but then also looking at the way in which everything from ICE as an agency, TSA, the Department of Homeland Security, all of these are agencies that were created post 9/11 that are actually the institutions that are the most operative right now. So there's been a long plan of militarizing federal agencies that have long been militarized or used various kinds of policing and surveillance tactics, but like to actually make them more and more acceptable in people's minds. And so you go first after the people that you think large swaths of the population don't care about or who already see as somehow social pariahs, right? And so that is the goal, right? And so just even in something directly impacting me back in January, the first of those executive orders that they issued were about global health programs the U.S. funded through USAID and some other agencies, PEPFAR, et cetera. And so they did that first because they know most Americans don't care or don't know enough about U.S. funding of like global health or development programs to care. And then after that happened and there was very little pushback from people, they rolled everything else the fuck out. And so that went after everything else, CDC to whatever else, name the agency. So this is also it just in general for queer people, white folks, whoever you are, if you accept that this is allowed to happen to somebody somewhere, be sure that it will be on your doorstep sooner than later.
And I definitely agree. I would say power is power, and power is always going to fight the opposition. Anything that poses to take away power's power is going to fight against it. And it's funny that you asked this question, Shay, because I always pick at people and say the purge didn't just get to the purge. At some point, we had to have a new founding father to create the new founding fathers. So I say that to say, if what's going on right now don't sound familiar and don't seem interesting to you, I beg you to pick up a book and read it, because this is a precursor to what's to come. This is just the beginning. And like Kenyon said, they start with marginalized communities because they think nobody's going to care about that. They start with things that you don't pay attention. That's why, if you notice, they've been dumbing down education ever since No Child Left Behind was first instituted during the Bush's administration. And they've been leaving every child behind since then, but that was a part of the plan. We have to dumb you down. Because if you know too much and we tell you a lie like they're openly doing now, you can fact check me. So yes, I do think this is a precursor to something different and bigger and worse. Mm-hmm.
Melodie, any thoughts before we go to break?
I think we said it. I think we said it. Should be on the lookout, folks, and be in community and fight and show up the way that you can. So it's a really scary time. So let's take another short break and we'll come back with a question or two from our mailbag. Stay tuned to Power Beyond Pride.
Welcome back to Power Beyond Pride. I am Mattie Bynum, the loudest hostess in the building, and I am here with my co-host, Mr. Kenyon, Miss Melodie, and Mr. Shane Lukas. Shane, for some reason, I always have to say your first and last name. It's almost like what's his face that did the Star Wars movie.
Like George Lucas? I prefer it sounds like a porn name, but I guess we'll go with that. I'd rather it sounded like a porn star name, and I'm good with that.
That's
Darth Vader.
That could be a topic one day. What'd you say? Can you?
I thought you were going to say, you said a Star Wars name that you have to say both the first and last. I thought you were going to say Darth Vader.
I do like that, but I thought you were going to say that was his porn star name. I'm about to say, how will we make that a porn star name for Shane, though? That's another topic for another day. But yes, one day we will have a discussion on what your porn star name will be. But for right now, we are going into our mail room for Melodie so that we can look in the mail slot and get the mail itself, and we can read the questions that have been sent to us. So I would say, Melodie, take it away.
Thanks, Mattie. So our first question comes from a listener via email. What does chosen family look like during Thanksgiving, during the holidays, and why is it so important for queer communities? I love this question, especially for someone like me who is somewhat estranged from a good chunk of my own family for various reasons. Connect the dots there, however you want to. And have been recently like trying to and succeeding in finding what we call chosen family here in Minneapolis. It's a really important thing for all people and queer people, especially given our tendencies to alienate ourselves from our families. So, yeah, what would you all say to this?
I know for me, when it comes to the holidays, now I do spend it more with my chosen family than I do my actual born family. And that's just because I don't feel like sitting in places where I have to prep you or I have to make you feel more comfortable than me. If I can't walk in and be the loudest person in the room, I don't want to be there. I'm just going to be honest. So I have learned that's my boundary when it comes to my family. I used to do Thanksgiving and holidays with my family. And I remember when I would go and be like, why is your nail so long? Or why your outfit look like that? Why you look better than me? Why your hair so pretty? And I was, yeah, after I got to a certain age, I was like, yeah, I'm done. No, I'm good. So I would say for me, I would definitely pick my chosen family over my biological family for the holidays or just important events in my life, period. But I would say if you're going to be around your family for the holidays, please set good boundaries and stick with them.
I mean, I would say, and I have a good relationship with my biological family there. I've been very blessed to have a very super pro queer, like extended family too. I feel very blessed in that sense. But I don't go home as much for Thanksgiving in particular. So I usually spend that with chosen family if I'm not back in my hometown or what have you. And of course, I'm going to be that person to say one of the things that's very frustrating to me about Thanksgiving is that I love that it is one of the few kind of holidays in this country that is not about mass like consumption and commercialism. It really is about spending time and kind of cooking with folks, whatever, but based on a genocidal myth. Is where I get very frustrated by it because I'm like, damn, if this could just not be connected, if this was not the genesis of it was not that, I would be more kind of all in for it. But so there's that. But I do think just as queer folks and other folks in general, because I just think we're in a country right now where generally people don't necessarily live close to their sort of biological families as people used to. And so I think people are really creating more relationships with sort of chosen family. Like I have straight friends and family members who talk about their chosen family, right, in ways that used to be very much a queer conversation. And so I do think it is important to go and spend time with people who love you, who see you fully. And you don't have to kind of, as Mattie was suggesting, kind of either dim your light or kind of play these games of being back in the closet, whether it's gender or whether it's your sexual orientation or both or what have you, in order to appease other people. Because what kind of holiday is that to have, especially on the mythical theme of Thanksgiving, to then have to be someplace where you don't actually feel welcomed is wild, right? So, if you don't have it, right, then you start to create it if you can. Get with the folks that you can and say, hey, I want to do something. That's why Friendsgiving is becoming a thing. Again, not just even among queer people. I'm starting to see it across the board. People are just figuring out ways like, let's get with our chosen family, even if we're going to do the family thing on the actual date later. I think it's all very important and really healthy.
And I want to give a big ditto and actually I was thinking the same thing, Kenyon, around our just changing habits, that we don't live typically in proximity to a lot of our families. And that is a massive cultural shift, right? Like people live across the country. And so we tend to choose specific events or activities, Thanksgiving being one of them, in which people travel. But there's also, I think, a shift in that too, in that it has become so overcrowded that now there's this sort of alternative visiting strategy that people impose because it's, oh, am I going to travel over Thanksgiving? No, right? So I'm going to do more social and be around the communities I have. So I think there is a sort of different migratory pattern that people have obviously in the last 100 years. And that's probably reflective of that. And then I would say also the idea about choosing to visit them offsite. I want to add, just from a personal standpoint, one of the biggest things that I have, because I have I would say, a contested relationship. Melodie, it was probably, as you mentioned, a fraught relationship in terms of my relationships with my own family. And one of those for me, and it kind of echoes a little bit of some of the conversation about what it meant to feel welcome, right? Is not, for my family, it's not so much about affirming, it is that they are both lazy and insensitive. And so the issue becomes, I am a guest in their house. They don't make an effort to see me. That is not an effort to spend time with me. It is not an effort to ask questions. It is not an effort to be in my life because they either don't want to know, they're not interested in that level of engagement. And for queer people, I think it's not an uncommon problem because the answers are gay bars and circuit parties and same-sex partners or my transition or whatever the case may be. And they are quote unquote accepting as long as it's done within the confines of their home and by their definition or through their, whatever their level of comfort is, right? There is not a lot of effort to put out toward actually building the relationship with their queer family members. Our queer family oftentimes has to put in that effort. It is our job to do that engagement, right? And at some point, I think it was very much a sort of agency builder for me was to say that I am not obligated to do that. It is not my job to put in all the effort. It is not my job to do this. And so I can start to define those boundaries, not just from an emotional standpoint, that I expect to be in an affirming space. I expect you to be respectful of my life, my decisions, my path, but also that if you're not going to make an effort, then I'm not going to expend more energy than I need to maintain this relationship. That is not my job. I think oftentimes it stems from this sense of I'm not worthy of that activity, of that attention. And so we tend to want to overperform. We tend to want to be like, oh no, I'll be there for all the things. Let me do all the stuff. And I think that can also be a weight that we do not need to carry. I think it is, you are worthy of attention and dignity and respect and love and care. And if they don't put the effort into that, if you are the only one sending the holiday cards, if you are the only one who's doing things, then I think it's worth taking a moment to sit back and go, this is not a two-way relationship. This is very much a one-way relationship. And I can choose to expend that energy in other ways to people who will engage in a much more mutual involvement. So I've certainly chosen family, and that is certainly a priority to me over, I would say, my blood relationships in that context. And that again comes from, I think, a variety of things. I've not faced slurs or any of that from my family. They're very affirming in general, but they are incredibly lazy. I feel like, I mean, a good example is my family has been in North Carolina multiple times and they have never once been to my house. And I've been here for almost 15 years. I've been to their house many times for their things. And so that is a good example of for what queer people experience. That is not an uncommon scenario. Like they will never come to your house because heaven forbid they experience your life in any way or put effort and engagement in that. And that
they might accidentally fall on your big black dildo.
I mean,
they're so scared.
That's true. You're not wrong. There you go. And so, yeah, it's where it comes from. I couldn't speak to their experience as to why, but I do know it's not an uncommon experience. And I know that for me, it's one that I had to sort of contend with because it comes back to self-worth. Do I feel I'm worthy of that? And I think when we go to other people's houses as guests, there is a bit of reluctance. And in what way can I be of trans experience? In what way can I be queer? In what way can I be of this experience that doesn't make it awkward over mashed potatoes?
Yeah, there's the kind of quiet homophobia or transphobia of it all. It's kind of what you're, I think, getting at. And then, but to another point that you made that I just thought about was, I was actually thinking about going home for Thanksgiving to Cleveland from California this trip. And I looked at plane tickets back in early October. So we've more than 6 weeks, almost 2 months out. And tickets were like $1,400. Like the amount I have flown to Europe and Africa for that much money. And literally, actually less in some cases. I've flown to Europe for less than what a ticket from California to Ohio would have cost. So this is, I think, is also what's happening, right, to people, like the price gouging of things at this time, especially flights, is another reason why people are just opting out. And I take away from, again, the conversation about kind of homophobia and transphobia in families, creating chosen family as a counter to that. But there's also just the economics of flying at the holidays where they're using AI tools to scale prices if they think you could pay more or whatever the case may be. So I think we're going to see less of that. But I'm going to transition to the next question from our mailbag, which I think we have the audio from, which comes from Allison. So we'll go ahead and play that clip and then get into our response. All right. So for y'all, I'll read the question. So I'm a school psychologist in North Carolina, and my question is, what are some ways that people who work at schools can be affirming to kids who are queer or questioning their identities, given the state of current laws across the U.S.? For example, in North Carolina, there's a law where we would have to tell parents if students want to use pronouns that don't align with the sex that we have in the system, or if they want to use a different name.
First thing is, it is deeply traumatic, I think, both for the instructor and the young person to have to play this game in a system that fundamentally does not want to see this young person for who they are. And that is horrifying, because I know a number of educators and their priority is they want to be good educators. And part of that active education is engaging with a student in their best self, right? Is encouraging that student to be their best self. And it's hard to do when you have to engage in this particular way. So to me, there's just a lot of forced trauma in the way the system is set up to be both transphobic and homophobic, really.
I'm going to be honest, I think it's counterproductive to have these things in place, because I'm going to be honest, I look at it from the teacher's perspective. Teachers already have a hard time trying to pronounce these names that y'all give these children that don't make no sense, first off. Okay, let's just start there. Y'all got kids in classes that got apostrophes and asterisks and names that they never should have been there in the first place. And then on top of that, Apple, look, let me just going to say this as an example. Let Apple come to me and tell me one day they want to be called a damn tree. Excuse my language. Now I got to call your mama and daddy at home or your emergency contact and say, is it okay if I call Apple a tree because she don't want to be called Apple no more? When does the teacher have time to teach anything? If we're putting up all these hoops for schools, educators, and administrators to have to jump through, we're making it hard for them to do their main job, and that's to teach our children, educate our children. Because you got so many guidelines now. Some people that I know who are teachers, they're like, you can't even really teach. You're just basically reading over what they want you to tell the children at this point. So I think it's counterproductive. And to be honest, the sad part is most of the time while the teachers and schools know this about your child before you do, mom and dad, it's because you don't have an open dialogue with them at home in the first place. And the one person they can turn to is their teacher or their guidance counselor or their principal, who can understand who they are. So yeah, that's my opinion on it.
What I find the hypocrisy of it all, or maybe they're actually linked in cahoots with one another, is, so we've been seeing this trend happen in the last few years, right? With states approaching 1,000 kind of anti-trans bills that were introduced in different state houses across the country.
Parental rights bills. Yeah.
Parental rights bills, or, all these things. My home state, Ohio, one of the which leading the pack, unfortunately. And so you have these like kind of mandating school counselors and psychologists and teachers to report if their student expresses any sort of gender difference than their sex assigned at birth, either in their pronouns, or they want to play with dolls if they're assigned boys, or whatever the case is, like all these kind of things, right? Or they say, I think I'm trans, I think I'm gay, I think I'm lesbian, whatever the case is. So you have this happening. Meanwhile, just this past week in the dismantling of the Department of Education, that you also had the Department of Education issue orders that they were now not going to, that the professional occupations, right, that are jobs that people often go to school for, licensing for, in order to get credentialed to be a psychologist, a nurse, or a school counselor, or what have you, that these are now going to be things that you probably won't be able to get federal grants or federal loan for. And what's interesting to me is all of the ones that they picked are mandatory reporters, right? So, which is to say, professions that which once you become licensed in, either again as a nurse, a psychologist, a counselor, et cetera, you are mandated to report anything that a person tells you about, is particularly children, about violence that they're experiencing in the home or in some other context, right? Whether it be physical, sexual abuse, et cetera, right? Those positions are you're mandated to report. But if you deprofessionalize them, so you actually create a condition where we have fewer of those people in the country who are licensed to do that work, then it means you have fewer people who are mandatory reporters, right? Of particular kinds of violence and targeting, which can include homophobia and transphobic violence and targeting in the home, or et cetera. And so to me, they're going to say that they're contradictory in the one sense that they are mandating reporting around gender identity, right, in particular, but also some of those laws include sexual orientation pieces, while also dismantling mandatory reporting because they're going to take away the possibility of getting certain kinds of federal loans and grants to actually get into some of those jobs that are, when you look at the list, they're all jobs that are mandatory reporters. Coming from an institute like where we're now covering up acts of sexual violence and pedophilia by people in or very closely attached to federal government.
What do we do? Are there things that people can do? I guess, Melodie, do you have thoughts on that? Should we encourage more queer people to be more active in, I'm always going to encourage, if you can join school board elections, join school board elections. If you're going to join commissions, join commissions.
Yeah, school boards, PTAs are good. And if there is, so I used to be on the board for a local chapter of an organization called GLSEN, GLSEN, Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. And at the local level, they have chapters in, I think, most states or many states, where essentially what they're doing is a lot of that, which is kind of propping up administrators who are working within public schools to help advocate for queer and trans youth in those schools. And particularly what they do is also to help any sort of gay straight alliances that exist within those schools that are student led. So, also if you're a student or closely connected to public schools, seeing what you can do in terms of strengthening whatever gay straight alliance exists within that school, because I think a lot of the advocacy within that school pipeline tends to come from the GSAs, if there is one, right? And public schools are formatted differently across the nation, right? Every state sort of does things differently. Like in Washington state, for example, they're what we know as like a local control state, where the school boards get to independently decide their own policies about what happens within public schools, whereas other states, the school boards don't necessarily have that same power. So it really varies state to state. I would say contact your local GLSEN chapter for ways that folks can get involved or to hear about tactics that are already sort of happening to tap into, because I think there's a lot of really good work that's already sort of happening. And where there isn't, just find out where those levers are. Is it the PTA? Is it the school board? Is it the State Board of Education? Is it a GSA, right?
So I want to thank you. I think that's brilliant to reach out to those organizations. Yeah, GSA is that Gender and Sexualities Alliance is the new adopted name for the GSA system, and they're amazing. I would also say this last week, we saw a number of students protest against ICE by stepping away from the classroom. And I want to encourage some havoc, to be honest. I want to encourage a little bit of havoc. I want to encourage students who understand that these rules, once they're old enough, when they understand that these rules are inhibiting who they are, that they feel that oppression, they feel the intersections of those impressions, especially, again, young people of color, different community, different individuals who are seeing these things take place and recognize it is just not right. It is not within the value systems we have as a nation. It is not what we want to build as a nation. And I loved seeing young people show up in the streets in response to the ICE raids this last week. And certainly, I think there are ways as elders in the community that you can obviously supporting organizations that support young people, especially affirming organizations that support young people, and then having conversations where you can enact power or where you can show up at local meetings, local events, in addition to what Melodie suggested. But I mean, I would love to see and certainly encourage young people to I think they see the value of organizing. I think they could see it in the ICE response this week. And I'm hoping they also, and I certainly will be a cheerleading member on the side of that conversation to hope that happens. But I do think there are other ways we might have to look at breaking the system in order, because the system is set up to simply not support these young people. So it doesn't help the teacher. I feel bad for the teacher. So I wish there's things that we could do there. But I do hope that maybe youth learning more about ways they can dissent, be for whatever reason. It does not have to be specifically for this reason, that perhaps there's opportunity there too.
Well, those are some good questions.
Yeah, these are really great questions. And I think all those are great responses. And yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add to that is just ask, maybe record for teachers incidents where this is occurring, and then to also, because being able to track these particular incidents or cases is important for legal cases. So either seeing if your local GLSEN chapter or even a lot of the state ACLUs are fighting these laws, that they may be helpful for them to also get information about what's happening in real time to give them more kind of cases for legal defense or strategies to kind of upend these laws later. So that's it.
And Melodie said, go to your local city council meetings and school board meetings. You don't have to have a child in school to attend the school board meetings. That way you can still know what's going on in your community. I remember growing up in my community, and some of the more active people at the schools didn't even have children at the schools, but they had just lived in that community for so long, and they saw what happens in that community. So yeah, get active, stay active. I do agree with Shane in a sense where I do cheerlead. I won't control chaos and act up. Now, I ain't going to just encourage havoc and acting up, but I definitely think that some control chaos and acting up is very much warranted in this situation.
Well, I love it. I love it. Well, thank you. Thank you all so much. Again, thank you for all those insights. It's wonderful to get these questions from activists and individuals across the country who are interested in how queer voices and how queer actions can impact their local communities. If you have questions about activist experience or how queer change making can impact your communities, feel free to send that to us at mail@powerbeyondpride.com or visit at the site powerbeyondpride.com to submit your question.
And also, don't forget that you can always send in videos to any of our social media channels. We are definitely on Instagram, Facebook. I do believe we have do we have a TikTok page? I don't know.
We're on all the social channels.
So all socials, please send out your videos.
Great. And that's all we have time for in this Reply All, our episode of Power Beyond Pride, where you hear your voices and then have the more conversation with us as hosts. I'm your co-host, Kenyon, along with my fellow co-hosts, and you can follow me at Kenyon Farrow at all the things. Are very easy to find. And I'm very grateful to be here with my other co-hosts.
And I am Mattie Bynum, one of your co-hosts this evening. You can follow me at Instagram, MattieSimone737, Facebook at Mattie Bynum. And always remember, please subscribe and get your friends and family to subscribe to Power Beyond Pride on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And check out our site, Power Beyond Pride, as well. All our information is there.
And I'm your co-host, Melodie KG. You can follow me on Instagram at Melodie KG, on Substack at melodiekg.substack.com, writing The Harm Reduction Lens. Power Beyond Pride is a project from A Great Idea, which is a queer-owned design and content agency. You can learn more about them at agreatidea.com. And
I am your fourth co-host, Shane Lukas. And I am, a ginger rabble rouser, apparently. I'm gonna foment all that dissent, people. Get out there. And you can follow me at my socials, ShaneLukas.com. And you can also follow me through all of the greatidea.com channels, at Great Idea channels. And this episode is produced by me. Hi, it's nice to see everybody. And Mattie Bynum is the project developer. Hi, Mattie. And our editor is the wonderful Jarrett Redding, with support from the phenomenal Ian Wilson.
We are all a part of this podcast, awesome host team, and we have other hosts and just want to shout them out as well. Remember to send in your questions and comments at powerbeyondpride.com.
And check out our new episodes each week on Tuesday as we look forward to queer change making with you on the next time. We thank you again for being with us here at Power Beyond Pride.